Yes. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm going to be, I'll introduce myself properly in a second, but I'm going to be talking about actually something that's come up quite a few times today, which is this idea of we have a business that needs to perform in a certain way, and we have all of these things that we're producing from the product backlog. How do you make sure that they're connected in together? I'm a product data strategy person. I've moved between those over the last 15 years, working at some big corporate names like Tesco and Elsevier, smaller places like lastminute.com and Skype, and really small apps, sort of running the whole gamut. And wherever I've been, it's always been really frustrating that the people who are running the business don't necessarily know what's happening at the detailed level in what's being produced by the product teams. And Marty this morning, he said a really interesting thing, that it's the product management's job to build products that customers love, but serve the needs of the business. And I think one of the things, customers is so important here that it's on twice. But one of the important things here is serve the needs of the business within the bounds of actually making something someone loves. It's a hard thing to do. And what we need is a framework that allows you to ladder between those two bits of the business. I mean, it feels to me like at the moment you've got these two groups of people talking completely different languages. You've got your people on one side just shouting, "Could you make some money?" And you've got the people on the other side saying, "But I'm building this thing. Is that going to work?" I call that the chasm, right? There's just this big space of air between people. And it's perfectly possible to build a bridge between those. I mean, if you're kind, you can call the people shouting for money, the strategy people, and your agile development world is your code. There are good known techniques for connecting between those two groups. The great thing is we've talked about them all day, except for one, actually. So this is our one metric that matters. It's a single measure that gives us a good guide as to how we're doing on our strategy. Then there's a group of levers and measures that explain how that works. And we've got data that tells us what's going on. We've got OKRs that tell us what we're going to do over the next quarter. And we're going to test how we do that. And that helps us connect. And I'll explain a little bit over the next 35 minutes about how that works. First, let's dig into the one metric that matters. So the first line on here is a little bit controversial, which is that there should be one top-level metric for measuring how you're doing on your strategy. Now, that's controversial because you can't run a business with one measure. But you can understand how you're doing towards that product vision and that product strategy. And so while overall you're going to still look at your profitability, you're going to look at a variety of things to tell you how well you're doing, there is a North Star that you work towards within the product world to try and get to your product vision. There's nothing else for it except that this has to be set at leadership level. If a group of product managers come together and say, "You know what, I think our most important thing today we're going to work on is registration conversion," no one's going to listen. And so we have to find a way to get our leadership group to engage with that. And one of the best ways is is that better? Can you hear me better? Yeah. Is to explain how to ladder between the top-level strategy and the metrics. And then the last thing here is, this is important, right? So this is a measure that explains how you're doing against all of the work that you as a product organization are producing. It shouldn't be an easy thing to decide on. It should take a lot of work to get to the point where you say, this is our measure. I'm just going to take give an example here about why choosing the wrong one is a bad thing. So who has heard of Tesco here? Who heard what happened to them in the legal sphere in the UK 3 or 4 years ago? Okay, so I had cooked the books down here, but I thought it was probably not such a good idea to write down. But originally, Tesco set EBITDA as its one thing, so it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, as the single most important thing that it worked towards. Problem is that excuses some terrible behavior. It means that it is okay to be awful to your suppliers. It means that it is okay to not spend anything on your stores because that cuts your bottom line. And if you take it too far, then someone's going to pass the line from just pushing the line to actually to breaking some very important rules, which is what happened to Tesco, and an awful lot of people got fired. Recently, they've understood that while EBITDA is important, the single thing that drives regular performance is how satisfied their customers are with their stores. And that's a completely different way of thinking about their business. It forces hard decisions. It means that they've had to reduce price at shelf. They've had to go through and make some really tough staffing choices. They've let people go, they've closed stores, but they've done that so that they can actually cut percentage points about how much things cost. They have spent an awful lot more on renovation, and they've sold some businesses that aren't core to them. And you can't make really tough, high-level decisions unless you know what the most important things are about your business. Sorry, my mic keeps disappearing, so that's why I keep getting confused. And so if we go through these, it's one level it's one measure that connects to your strategy. It's run at the leadership level and should be fought over significantly, and it's not just about money. If it was just about money, it'd be easy. It's about what is the right thing for your strategy. But even though there's only one metric, there's an awful lot of complexity that sits behind that metric. So we're going to have to go and look a little bit deeper. And so our next stone in our bridge is our driver's tree. I hope no one's getting sick, because this is going in and out of the thing. So close your eyes, maybe, when I get to the bridge bit. So what actually makes up your one metric that matters? We've got sales. Sales is pretty simple. For a subscriptions business, maybe it's your new stuff and your repeat stuff. And that's pretty simple. It's built up from your new orders and your order value. That drives your new sales number, your due for renewal, and your renewal rate. So what we can see very clearly is that you can start breaking down your top-level metric all the way down into the things that make it up. Each of these boxes needs someone whose job it is to make sure that it's working. If it's hard to assign a person to one of your core measures, likelihood is that your organization is not set up to support your strategy. And this is always a problem. So a client that I'm working with at the moment, we're having to go through this, and there's an awful lot of boxes that have 2 or 3 people in. And we're in the process of disambiguating that at the moment, but what that's led to is problems which no one is resolving. And it happens a lot in products. So if you've got a product manager who's responsible for a set of features, if a customer problem happens that affects their metric or their drivers, then but it's not part of their feature set, then they can comfortably ignore it. You can comfortably ignore it. And it's no one's fault if something doesn't get picked up. One of these trees, they evolve over time. So you never, ever get these right first time round, because you're trying to map a business into a slide. You can't do that unless you've been looking at it for a long time. The other thing I'd say here is that this is a great place for data science teams to give you some understanding. So if you've got churn analysis, or you've got drivers of lifetime value, or things like that, then those really brilliantly sit inside this driver's model. And the other thing I'd say here is choose well. So if we take the simple version that I put on the screen before, as I say, this is some work that I'm doing for a current client. This is the first version of a drivers tree that we made together, or a cut-down version. So if I just take out, we just added spend and how many users they've got and conversion, so we can start to get new orders. This is brilliant, right? It makes a lot of sense. You can see what's happening. It's also, unfortunately, not very helpful, because two of their main things that they care about, they're in a growth phase, and so they care about how much it costs to acquire a customer and how much they earn from that customer over their lifetime. So this sensible way of looking at things is actually not going to help them. So we've put something together which is a little bit more prosaic, I suppose, but their metric that matters is return from growth spend, because they just have to work out how to grow at the moment. And the two drivers of that are customer acquisition and lifetime value. And so the great thing is that everybody who sits either in their marketing or product teams now knows where they sit in terms of driving this strategic outcome. They're either getting people, they're converting people, they're working out how to monetize those people and get value from them, or they're making them super happy so that they keep coming back and get a long lifetime. There is an awful lot of detail that sits underneath these, but this gives you an idea of how you have to start thinking about laddering up from an individual's responsibility up to the metric that matters. So there we go. Choose it well. Because if you choose it wrong, you're going to spend all of your time looking at the wrong sorts of activities. So we've been through, we've understood what our metric that matters are, we know what drives those metrics, and now we start having to understand those in an awful lot more detail. So we need some data. I think it's really important to say that as a product person, you can only fix what you can see. If you don't know that it's not working, then you can't, and you won't do anything about it. So you need visibility, and you need the right data for what you're doing. If we think about a driver's tree, each one of those boxes is probably also a dashboard that sits under there that tells you what's happening with those metrics. If I give an example of one of those. So this is something that my consultancy a few years ago built for Skype. Really simple. It's got a driver's tree on it. You can see how we get to revenue. We've got average order value and orders. It didn't come with these black things. Not very helpful to share that with you. It's got some of the descriptive metrics. But what we can see is that orders is not doing very well, and it's not doing very well because checkout conversion is down. So it becomes super easy to say, right, who's responsible for checkout? And there you go, and so the person who's responsible for checkout then goes and works out, well, what happened? Was it, did I have a technical problem? Did someone acquire the wrong sort of users? It becomes a much easier problem to solve than, oh my God, we don't have enough orders this month. So that sort of guided analysis, you need to be working with your data teams to get them to help you do that. Because there are some really great tools that will make that super easy. And once you have them, it gives you an awful lot more autonomy. So now we've understood it. So what we need to do is set some objectives. I'm going to talk a little bit take a little time to talk about OKRs now, because they've come up 3 or 4 times today, and there were a few questions that didn't get answered earlier, and so at the end, if we've got some time, please ask questions about them, because I think that these are an incredibly valuable tool. So an OKR breaks down into an objective, which is what's the short to mid-term goal that you're currently working towards, and then a key result, which is a measure of whether you've achieved that objective. Now, someone asked earlier, everyone keeps saying this is really hard. Why are we bothering to do this? And the way that I think about it is about 10, 15 years ago, we moved from waterfall technology management to agile technology management. And that is from we set a requirement to we set an outcome and we work together to deliver that really well. Right? It's the birth of product management, it's as it currently exists, and it's the birth of that flexible approach to delivering software. OKRs is the same thing for business management. So if this objective is not deliver a project. it is an outcome that you want to deliver, and this is the way that we've measured it. But when Agile started to be rolled out, and I remember at lastminute.com, it was a massive change program that we went through. There were Agile coaches. It took a good 18 months to move from this very waterfall process to a fully embedded Agile process. That level of structure has not been done with OKR rollout, which is why it's so hard. It's a completely different way of approaching things, and we're not doing it properly. Most companies, when they roll it out, it just doesn't feel like that it's being done in the same way. And as with any of these tools, because there's a high upfront investment, as soon as it doesn't work, it goes from being a tool to being a chore. And when it's a chore, it's not done properly, and then it gets less and less valuable, and then it gets stopped. So I'll talk through in a second some examples of this, and because I think it really does drive value, and it means that it helps you do that connection between the data and actually building the backlog. So anyway, for this to work, the product manager needs real ownership. I think Marty called it, he called it something else, but it's basically the same thing. You have to have the right resources and the information to make your decisions. You have to choose how to get there. And what that means is you might have a roadmap, but if a feature isn't working, you have to be able to say, I'm not building that anymore. It doesn't work for the customer. And being held to a predetermined list of features doesn't work with this way of approaching outcomes. But the last thing is that because you have a key result, you have a measure for whether or not you've achieved that objective, which is not a feature, and which is not a set of actions, then you still have accountability. And this is what allows you to maintain that integrity, that trust that Marty was talking about earlier, which allows the leadership to leave you alone a little bit to get on with things. Because you can say, it's all right, I'm not building what I said I was going to build, but I'm still going to get where I need to get to. So if we take an example, so let's assume that if we think about the drivers tree we did earlier, return from growth spend. You've got the metric that matters at the top. That's the thing that we care about, the return from growth spend. Our drivers tree tells us that we need to reduce our acquisition cost. And to do that, we need to increase registrations, because that's the part of the process which at the moment isn't working perfectly. So, as a group, we come up with an objective, and that is get the user excited to register as soon as they start to see the product. And that's great, because you can set a result. You can measure that, because you need an increase in your day one registrations. So this is the from our strategy right down to this is what we actually have to achieve over the next 3 months. The interesting thing about that, when you start to think about it, though, is you could get there in a variety of ways. To increase D1 registrations, you could build out your value messaging, you could build a new feature into the product, you could cut your registration form to one field, or you could register people after they've started using it. There's a whole series of things that would work here, and the OKR does not say exactly what is going to be done. So, so OKRs, an outcome-based business management in the same way that an epic is an outcome technical management or development management. It needs you to have real ownership. It needs you to have some agency. Your key results are not features. They are a change in a business, in a metric, and there are many ways to get there. But once you've thought of those many ways, you know what you need to do. You don't know how you're going to get there. So we need another stone. And this is experimentation. So I think it should be a mantra of everybody that you don't spend time on things that don't work. In this framework in particular, that is very important. If we go back to our OKRs, this is 3 months. Sorry. You've got 3 months to increase your day one registration by 20%. You're not going to get all the way there. The target is that 70% of OKRs should be reached, but it's not very long. So within 2 weeks, you need to know how you're going to get there. Sorry, backwards and forwards. So you can't spend time on anything that isn't going to work. So your first activity here it's exploring. It's not optimizing. So it's a different experimental approach than you would use normally. So the way I think about them is optimizing is taking two things, both of which will work, and being able to say clearly, this one is a bit better. When you're exploring, you have a different set of questions. It's not which of these will work. I have 500 things I could do, well, hopefully not that many. But of those, which of these does a user even care about? And even if they care about them, will it shift their behavior? A lot of times we go into building something that actually doesn't get us all the way to the outcome that we need. And so you need a way to make the decision about where to spend your time. So as we're thinking we need to be quick, we've got 2 weeks to make this decision. You need to be quick and dirty. And when I say dirty, I mean really dirty. So if we go back to our different features, you've got, if we take the value message, are you going to do some intensive user research? Well, that's going to take more than 2 weeks. If you're going to build a new feature, even the minimum version of a product here is not going to be done in the time it takes. And then a test is going to take 2 weeks. And then analyzing the results is going to take some time. This is going to eat half of your time at least. Could you cut the registration form? Well, that's easier to do on the front end. But if you're going to do deep database integration, if you've only got 2 forms, probably the whole of the back end is going to fall over unless you do a whole series of integrations. This is a lot of work. And it's not going to be done quickly enough. So for a value message, just write some things up. See if a user will actually click because you changed what you were saying to them. For a new feature, mock it up, put it on the site, and then when someone clicks through, just put a 404 up. It's not a great customer experience, but neither is having a feature that no one cares about. And then this one, same thing. So you build a form, and you click the registration button. That's your registration rate. But you get oh, this didn't work, and then you fail to the real form. You can still get there, but you get your comparative rates. So there is always a way to test what you're trying to do with very low effort. And we have a tendency to think that anything that a customer sees must be perfect or must be good. And that's true to an extent. But we all know that we push out code that has bugs in. And sometimes we can use that to our advantage. So here's what we can do here. You just use really tiny rates. You're just trying to see if you can change users' behavior. So I think that's the core here, is that don't spend time on things that don't work. You know what will work, right? We've done some experimentation to understand that of those 3 things, let's assume that of all of them, the cutting the registration form is going to drive that D1 registration rate. So you know what you need to do. I think we've built a bridge in terrifyingly record time. But I think the nice thing is that once you've done that, you can go and build something amazing. I'm not going to pretend that I can do that better than you. I think you're doing this every day. But I will say, you continuously need to connect your stories back to your tests and your OKRs. The next thing that you have to do, if you have spent the time up front building out that driver's tree, it's easy to make that decision because you know what the next thing that isn't optimized is. I think it is perfectly possible and doable to build each story based on the big picture. And once we've got a metric that matters, which is connected to the strategy, well, that's great, because then you can build a driver's tree, and you can set your objectives. And once you've set your objectives, well, you know what your strategies are to get there, and you just need to quickly and dirtily, I'm going to say that word far too many times, test what your strategies are, and then you've got your backlog. The thing that it isn't on here now, but it was a beautiful thing to start with. Once you're saying it right, you can say these guys, they start from different directions. So our money man actually says, this is our strategy. So we're going to build. So this is the measure we need to impact. And because we need to impact that measure, then we're going to have to do these three objectives, and we're going to test these 5 things to get there. And these guys, they can go in the opposite direction, and so you can get all the way from one to the other. That is me, which is surprising. But does anyone have any questions? The thing that I'm going to jump back a little bit. Quite a way, actually. Okay. I'm gonna go to here because this is the point that really connects those 2 ends, and it keeps coming up that it's hard, but I'm actually really interested. How many people are using OKRs at the moment? Yeah, about half. How many people are finding it valuable? About half of that half. So the thing that, sorry, I'm trying to work this out because it's one of the themes that came up out of the day. One of the most important things here is that I think that the access to the right resources and the freedom to choose is what's getting lost. And it's actually just being used as an opportunity to apply more accountability without giving any more freedom. And so if there was one thing that I could get you to take from this talk, and take it back, it would be that these are incredibly helpful, but they're only helpful within the context of actually being able to make the decisions about what the strategy should be. So let me jump to the end, but I think, just as Louis, I'm done about 10 minutes early.
Round of applause, please. There's zero problem with finishing early because it gives us more time for questions. Can we get the Slido up, please? Remember, go to slido.com and then enter Impact BP, all one word, all lowercase. Look,
okay, we've got some questions.
Look, so many questions. Do you want me to read them or can you manage yourself?
Go.
Okay. Is it okay to change OMTM every 6 to 12 months, or does it need to live longer?
That is the very helpful answer. It depends. So your metric that matters is tied very closely to 2 things. Your current stage as a business. I'd say 3 things, actually. So what stage you are as a business, your business model, and then what your current objective is within those. And so if I take an example, if your stage is growth phase, right? You're in your early growth phase, and your business model is just standard e-commerce, then you're going to have a very different one metric that matters than if you are much flatter growth, or if you're selling a subs business, if you're in a subs business. And so your one metric that matters changes at the point at which it's appropriate to change your strategy. Likelihood is that's not every 6 to 12 months unless you've done an amazing job at delivering on your current objectives. The thing that does change regularly are your OKRs, because those are quarterly or 6-monthly objectives. And so the metric that matters stays relatively stable, but what you're trying to deliver underneath that regularly moves.
Okay, this next question, you shouldn't have stayed anonymous because I love this question. Quick and dirty, really dirty, is this hurting your brand? Where did that go? Put it back up. Quick and dirty, really dirty, is this approach harming your brand?
It depends how it's done. And so, as I say, it is unlikely that you're shipping code that doesn't have any bugs. So there are things like this on your site or on your apps already. You don't want to introduce too many, and you want to make sure that they're very limited audiences and that you have relatively elegant failovers. That said, sometimes you need to take some form of a risk in order to get the right sort of information. So maybe a bit, but if you're delivering the value that you need to well enough every quarter, you're going to offset that damage, more than offset that damage.
Thank you. Another question about being quick and dirty. Moving from quick and dirty, and dirty to proper implementation, how to bridge it?
So the reason that you test is not to build your backlog. The reason that you do that early testing is to decide what is the next approach you will take for building out your product. And so once you've made that decision, you move into much more standard epic and story generation. So you would build your backlog in exactly the same way as you currently do. You take the first step, which is making a decision about what you're going to build, because you admit to yourself and the people around you that you don't know, because none of us really do, because often you get surprising results.
Okay, next question. You talked about OKRs being in a 3-month quarter cycle. That is the same in my business. But why? Shouldn't the timeframes of OKRs also be agile?
Maybe. Well, no. No, okay, no.
Could we do all questions like, no?
No. So what you're doing with OKRs is you're setting boundaries around agile development. And so what we're saying is there are we have to keep working on this until we've hit our goal. And we're doing that because we know that it has this impact on the long-term value that we're trying to deliver. And so and it takes time to get there, and you have to go through more than one iteration, right? You're going to hit a build, measure, learn cycle. You need to go through 2 or 3 to start actually optimizing what you're building to get towards your OKR. And so I'd say 3 months is actually the minimum, but if we're saying agile, you could decide that actually it's 6 months, but making it any shorter, you're just not going to be able to deliver the sort of value that you need to if you're setting the right difficulty of OKR.
What would the driver tree for Tesco's one metric that matters look like?
Which one? For customer satisfaction? So because that was an in-store satisfaction measure, it was less directly and behaviorally measurable than the online ones. But the way that it was done was customer satisfaction was driven by was driven by 3 in-store measures. So it was 8 a.m. Stock availability, queue length, and price perception. And those three then obviously had other things behind them. So 8 a.m. Stock availability is driven by your supply chain, and so there's a whole series of metrics that sit under the supply chain. Queue length is a mixture of staffing and and how well your automated tills are working, and your price perception is actually very complicated because it's not just about price, is what we found, and so there's an awful lot of there's complex multi-touch drivers that sit under there, but you can build these out even for much softer metrics. Just the relationships are not direct and they're not linear. So an example which might be closer to all of our digital hearts would be spend on natural search. So we know that if we spend more on content, we're going to get better natural search results, but it's not a direct linear relationship. But we can still work out what that is, and we know that we have to make those payments.
This next question brings up an interesting case of grammar. Some companies have different product lines. Amazon, extreme example. Does anyone else think that they'd really like to have Amazon Extreme? Okay, just me. Should they still use one metric that matters for the company, or group by product line, or some other common denominator?
It depends who you ask. I would guess, is it clear I don't have a good answer? I think there is still a strategic driver. And I suppose the answer is whatever is the appropriate unit for product vision is the space where you have your metric that matters. And if the product vision is completely separate and the strategic vision is a separate thing, then likelihood are that you're going to have multiple pillars here. If, however, everyone is moving towards reducing cost of delivery. So for a long time, right, one of the big things was that was in these delivery businesses was that they were losing money on small orders. So that then sits as a metric that matters for everybody. But as soon as you separate out your strategic objectives, then they each need a measure, they need a metric that matters.
What's the best alternative to OKRs? I don't know why best is in parentheses. Seems almost apologetic.
Okay, sorry, I started reading the ones underneath. Right, what's the best alternative to OKRs? I don't know. I don't have a good alternative. If you can find a way to set a goal that is easily measurable, that connects to what other people are doing, that is not an OKR, go do it. But I think what you're producing there is an OKR by a different name. It's just it will just be a different way of producing it. So I don't have a good answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. I think that'll do. You've answered a lot of questions. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be back in half an hour.